Hello everyone, my name is JJ, and today we are going to do part 5 of my ongoing project to profile the leaders of every single country in the world. We have done 44 countries so far, and today we are going to do another 10. But before we begin, I would just like to give a shout out to today's video sponsor, Audible, the beloved audiobook company. Right now, they have a great limited time offer where you can get 3 months of Audible for only $6.95 per month. Just visit audible.com/JJMcCullough or text JJ McCullough to 500-500 to get started. The link is also in the description. All right, so country number 45 is Cyprus. The island of Cyprus, much like the Korean peninsula, is divided into 2 parts with 2 different governments. You have the north part, which is run by Turkish people, and the south part, which is run by Greeks. And the south part is considered the legitimate government, whereas the north part is like the rebel part, which I guess is also like Korea. Anyway, the president of Greek Cyprus is Nikos Anastasiades, who was elected in 2013. He has been in elected office for more than half his life as a longtime member of parliament and leader of the Cyprus Conservative Party. Since 2015, the president of North Cyprus has been a guy called Mustafa Akıncı. He is also a career politician who served a rather impressive 14 terms as mayor of the Turkish half of the Cyprus capital. Both of the Cyprus presidents are considered moderates and are in favor of uniting the island, which is something the Cypriots have been talking about doing for many decades now, but can never seem to get around to it because of, politics. But these presidents say they are more into it than others because they are both quite old and thus are sort of the last of the political generation that have memories of what it was like to live in Cyprus before the division. Once that political generation goes away, unification becomes a much harder task, as we have seen in Korea. All right, next up, the Czech Republic. The current president of the Czech Republic is Miloš Zeman. He was elected in 2013 and is in fact the first ever elected president of the Czech Republic, since previously their president was appointed by the parliament. President Zeman is one of the many right-wing populist leaders running Eastern Europe these days. He is very big on Putin and very down on Muslims. The Washington Post had a piece calling him Europe's Trumpiest president. He was the only European leader to openly endorse President Trump's election. One other notable thing about him is that he seems to be rather extraordinarily unhealthy. He is 73 years old with quite advanced diabetes, and all of the stories note that he is also a chain smoker and something of a borderline alcoholic. When you look at some of the footage of him, he hardly comes off as a man who is going to make it through his second term with much ease. And speaking of footage, when I was researching him, I came across this incredibly awkward clip of him making small talk with Queen Elizabeth.
My daughter, who studies in London College University.
Oh, do you?
Really?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
That's very nice. So are you on a visit here visiting London?
Yes, of course. This is my first visit to London in my life.
Is it?
Yes.
Oh. And is it your first visit?
My last visit was here.
All right, so finally, that is the end of the C countries. Let us now move on to the Ds. And D number 1 is Denmark. The head of that country is State Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen. He came to power in 2015 and is actually in his second round as PM, or I guess SM. Rasmussen is head of the Danish Liberal Party. He first became state minister in 2007 when the old state minister, whose name was also Rasmussen, resigned to become head of NATO. But then in 2011, the Danish Liberals lost their bid for re-election to the socialist opposition. Rasmussen hung around as opposition leader, however, and in 2015, the Liberal coalition was elected back to power. The controversial thing about State Minister Rasmussen is that in order to stay in power, his government also relies on the votes of the Danish People's Party, which is one of those populist anti-immigrant parties that have risen to become quite a force in European politics these days. Rasmussen seems like quite a boring guy. He has basically been in politics his whole life, beginning with when he was head of the Young Liberals in his early 20s. In the absence of any interesting biographical details about him, please appreciate this photo in which he is standing in a plane in the Danish Air Force, saluting another plane in the Danish Air Force. Next up is Djibouti. Their president is Ismaili Omar Guelleh. He has been in power for 20 years and assumed office when the previous president, who was in power for 22 years, resigned in 1999. These guys are the only 2 presidents in Djibouti history. Guelleh served in the first president's administration for many years and was trusted with a number of important jobs by the president. possibly because he was his nephew. When he became president in 1999, he proceeded to run the country as his personal dictatorship. The country has very little in the way of political freedom, and most citizens live in abject poverty. But the world loves President Gale anyway and continues to shower him in praise and gifts. Because you see, Djibouti is located in this very strategically important place, right at the intersection between the Middle East and Africa. The US, France, Italy, China, and Japan all have military bases in the country, which President Gale is perfectly happy with as long as the foreign cash keeps coming. Next, we have the Republic of Dominica, which is not to be confused with the Dominican Republic, which we will do after. Dominica is a Caribbean country, formerly British. Their leader is Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit. He assumed office in 2004 following the death of the old Prime Minister. Skerrit had entered politics when he was quite young and became Prime Minister when he was only 31 years old. Skerrit is from the Dominican Labour Party and has led quite a left-wing government. He has sucked up a lot to China and Venezuela and is not very big on America, despite the fact that he went to college there. When Skerrit first assumed office in 2004, the Dominican press called him their country's most eligible bachelor because he was very handsome and young and powerful. But bad news, ladies, he wound up getting married in 2013. From what I can tell, a lot of Dominicans actually kind of resent how much media attention his personal life gets. Okay, now we have the Dominican Republic. Their president is Danilo Medina. Medina was an economist turned politician turned political staffer. He served as chief of staff to former Dominican Republican President Leonel Fernandez during his 2 non-consecutive terms. The Dominican Republic is one of those countries where the president is not allowed to serve back-to-back terms, or at least it used to be. In 2012, Medina ran for president in his own right to succeed his boss. Apparently they had been fighting lately, so Medina helped smooth the transition by making his boss's wife his vice president. Since being elected, Medina has proceeded to become one of the most popular world leaders on earth with an approval rating of over 90%. It is not always clear to outsiders what exactly is the root of his popularity. The Dominican Republic still has a lot of problems, but President Medina is just considered like a kind and competent and non-corrupt man, and in that part of the world, that means a lot. But anyway, one of the side effects of his massive popularity is that they changed the Dominican Republican Constitution to allow the president to run for a consecutive second term, which of course he won in 2016 with 62% of the vote, which is an extremely impressive result in a democracy. Moving on to the E's, we have Ecuador. The current president of Ecuador is from his country's leading left-wing party, and apparently leftism runs in his family because his parents literally named him Lenin. President Lenin Moreno is also interesting because I believe he is the only world leader to use a wheelchair. He was paralyzed in 1998 when he got shot in the back when he got caught in the crossfire of an armed robbery at the mall. He credits his heroic recovery to the healing power of laughter, as articulated in his best-selling memoir, Laugh, Don't Be Sick. Before Moreno became president of Ecuador, he was vice president of Ecuador under that country's former Chavez-like leader, Rafael Correa. Moreno is considered quite a bit more moderate than Correa, however, and the two had a bit of a high-profile breakup last year. Modero backed a successful amendment to the Ecuadorian constitution that would prevent former presidents from running for a second non-consecutive term, Dominican Republic style. President Correa didn't exactly use a lot of sensitivity in expressing his reaction to this. He called President Moreno a deformed man who takes out his pain on others. So yeah, that's not a great way to talk. Next we have Egypt, which is run by Field Marshal Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Al-Sisi is a longtime soldier who rose through the ranks to become defense minister under Egypt's first elected president, Mohamed Morsi. But then in 2013, al-Sisi staged a coup and overthrew Morsi and stuck him in prison. As you may remember, this was quite a controversial thing all over in the world at the time. President Morsi was part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and a lot of people accused him of having a secret Islamist agenda to turn Egypt into a fundamentalist society like Iran. But you know, Morsi was also only in power for a year, so a lot of the case against him was based more on speculation of what he might do rather than what he actually did. In power, al-Sisi has basically been like all other Egyptian presidents, killing people that oppose him and running a pretty brutal dictatorship. And like most Egyptian presidents, he's also sucked up a lot to the West by running a foreign policy that's basically in line with our priorities. Under him, Egypt has been like very firmly part of the Saudi-Israel bloc, against like the Turkey-Iran bloc. Now it is time for El Salvador. The president of El Salvador is Salvador Sanchez Cerén. Yes, that's right, their president is named after his own country. This would be like if Canada was run by Prime Minister Canada Trudeau. Anyway, Salvador Sanchez Cerén is another one of these left-wing Latin American leaders. As a young man, he was a Marxist guerrilla in his country's long-running civil war. His election in 2014 thus represented an important chapter of that phase of their history. One of the big things Salvador Sanchez Cerén has done during his time in office is establish diplomatic connections with the People's Republic of China. El Salvador had previously been one of the world's most loyal allies of Taiwan, a country that pro-Taiwanese folks would often hold up as a good example to emulate. So the fact that El Salvador has now switched sides in this very long-running, you can only pick one or the other diplomatic game is kind of a big development. Just as an aside, one thing that I've really started to notice when I'm studying the governments of all these different countries around the world is just what an increasingly large role China is starting to play behind the scenes. Like, even a lot of these really small little countries in like the Caribbean or Latin America that we might not think much about, the Chinese are often involved in a very active effort to sort of win their loyalty with like money and weapons and infrastructure programs and stuff like this. Seems like the kind of thing worth keeping an eye on. All right, next country, Equatorial Guinea. This is a very small country in Africa that has one of the most appalling dictatorships in the world. Their president is Colonel Teodoro Obiang Nguema Masabago. He has been in power since 1979. Come next August, he will have officially been in power for 40 straight years. As a young man, Colonel Obiang was trained in the Spanish Army, which was the colonial power ruling Equatorial Guinea at that time. His uncle became the country's first president, and he made his nephew his defense minister. And then in 1979, his nephew repaid the favor by overthrowing his uncle and killing him. Things haven't been that great in Equatorial Guinea during Colonel Obiang's decades of rule. Very poor country, very little political freedom, and even though it is in theory a wealthy country because it has quite a lot of oil, all of that wealth has just been hoarded by the president and his family. In 2010, Colonel Obiang noticed that he had become one of the world's most unpopular leaders, shunned by basically everything and everyone. So he decided to make some changes. Specifically, he decided to hire a $60,000 a month American PR firm to improve his image. This proceeded to be a very difficult thing to do, considering that his government has absolutely no redeeming qualities. Millions of dollars later, one of the few positive things they could come up with was the fact that there was once this family that emigrated out of Equatorial Guinea, probably to escape all of the political oppression and poverty, and their daughter grew up to be a woman who in 2011 was named Michigan Teacher of the Year. So there you go. Can we have our foreign aid back? Lastly, we have Eritrea. This is a country that separated from Ethiopia in 1993. They have only had one president since then, a guy called Isaias Afewerki. During the before times, Afewerki was a rebel leader in the Eritrean Liberation Front, which was this separatist group fighting for independence from Ethiopia. He rose through the ranks of that organization until he became leader of the group. And then when the Ethiopian government was overthrown in 1991, he took advantage of that situation to become head of Eritrea, and he has been running the place ever since. For the last 20 years, President Afewerki's mantra has been that Eritrea must never ever let down its guard against the Ethiopian menace. So he has kept his country officially at war with Ethiopia and spent all this money on the military and introduced mandatory military conscription for all citizens, often for indefinite terms. This obsession with national security has turned Eritrea into a sort of North Korean-style hermit kingdom with a similarly paranoid and conspiratorial leader. But just this past summer, Eritrea and Ethiopia actually went a ways to establishing a permanent peace between their countries, with President Afewerki even venturing outside of his underground bunker to sign a treaty in the Ethiopian capital. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, JJ, how is it that you know so much about all these different presidents? Well, the fact is, I read a lot. Or I have people read to me. And one of the best ways that you can learn things by having people read to you is with my good friends at Audible. As I'm sure you know from all of your other favorite YouTube channels and podcasts, Audible is the web's leading provider of downloadable audiobooks. They have the world's largest selection of both fiction and non-fiction titles. You just get the app for your phone, and then you can buy and download these books and listen to them whenever you want. I always listen to them when I go for a walk in the morning or when I'm on the train. The app is super easy to use, and you never lose your place. And you also never lose your books because once you buy them, they're like with you forever. In addition to their big selection of standard book titles, they also have this new thing called Audible Originals. It's where they put all of this new stuff that they've created exclusively for Audible subscribers, including not only unique audiobooks, but like new podcasts and comedy shows and radio dramas and all sorts of other cool stuff. Anyway, the limited time offer they have right now is that you guys can get access to 3 months of Audible for only $6.95 per month. Just visit audible.com/JJMcCullough to sign up, or you can text JJ McCullough to 500-500 and do it that way. One book that I have been listening to recently, and I think you guys might enjoy, is Fear by Bob Woodward. You may recall that this is a book that made a lot of headlines earlier this year. It is a very richly reported narrative account of what life was like in the final months of the Trump presidential campaign and the first year of the Trump presidency. I've always been a big fan of Bob Woodward just because I think he's a very good political storyteller. He takes the sort of complex world of politics and makes it into just this very engaging storyline with lots of clear characters and plots and drama. Whether you're pro or anti-Trump, I'm sure you will get something out of this book. It is just such a detailed account of what life was like in this most unlikely of presidential campaigns, which turned into the most unlikely of presidencies. So yes, thanks again to Audible. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all next week.
So, but as far as I know, Your Majesty, you met 10 prime ministers. Am I right?
Yes.